Time now for another one of our interview segments presented by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people, and it is our martial law segment. Now, this radio program is intended to be for informational purposes only. This information does not constitute legal advice. The law is constantly changing, and the information may not be complete or correct depending on the date and your particular legal problem. Each legal problem depends on its individual facts, and different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of these differences, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. Joining us on the phone today, of course, Marshall Chriswell, joining us once again. Marshall, it's good to hear from you.
Hey, good to talk to you, Josh.
All right, so today's topic, you and I were talking about this, common law marriage. Now, I was under the assumption that doesn't exist in Pennsylvania.
Well, common law marriage, and that's one of the things that, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, because I get so many questions from people about common law marriage. You know, they say, well, hey, I've lived with my significant other for, X number of years. A lot of times people are under the notion that it needs to be 7 years of living together, and you're common law married at that point. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this was to dispel a myth about common law marriage. It was abolished in Pennsylvania in 2005. Okay, so, and there are very few states in the country that still recognize common law marriage. But even though it was abolished in 2005, it's still relevant because, I still deal with common law marriage cases because what the legislature said when they abolished it was that common law marriages that began prior to 2005 are still valid. So there are still lots of folks out there that do meet the very specific requirements for common law marriage, and their relationship began before 2005.
So those marriages were then grandfathered in, so to speak.
Exactly.
Okay, so what we'll say this, what constituted then a common law marriage back in the day?
Sure. So and I get clients today that come in and we determine that they have a common law marriage because they meet these requirements and met them back before 2005. The biggest one is that, first of all, you have to have capacity to be married. So you have to be an adult. Had to be over 18 years of age at the time that you entered into the common law marriage, and that you weren't married to anybody else at the time. And back then there was a third requirement that you had to be couples of the opposite sex, but the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has since said that since same-sex marriages are legal in the United States through the Supreme Court decision, that same-sex couples could be common law married as well. So as long as you're 18 and you weren't married to anybody else whenever you entered your common law marriage, you're eligible to do it. But the biggest requirement is that you have to have said words that indicated a present intent to marry. Mm-hmm. So, and this is akin to if you have a ceremonial marriage, you take vows. And you say, I take you as my husband, I take you as my wife, and, the pastor or minister asks the questions, and you say, I do. This is a similar requirement for common law marriage, and this is the big hurdle that a lot of folks don't get over. There are a lot of people that have lived together for a long period of time and can establish that they basically acted as husband and wife, but they never had that moment where they both said, I take you as my husband, I take you as my wife. We indicate our present intent to marry. Mm-hmm. So that's the biggest requirement, and you have to prove it by clear and convincing evidence, which is the highest legal burden in civil law.
So basically saying we're going to be married in such and such a date and maybe having the release come out in the newspaper, that doesn't exactly make that the current intent.
That's correct. There are specific case law that say that does not constitute present intent. That it constitutes a future intent to be married. So, saying that we plan to be married, buying rings, There are tragic cases where couples are together for a long time. They plan to be married. They plan their wedding date, and they're about to get married, and one spouse tragically passes away. And you have these cases where one putative spouse, future spouse passes away, and you have the other person coming in and saying to the court, and they're not eligible for life insurance benefits or retirement benefits or Social Security benefits or distribution of property that they owned with the other spouse. And they're coming to the court saying, okay, we're common law married. I should be entitled to these things because we've been together for 30 years. And the court says, well, no, the requirement is that you had, even though you were going to be married next week, that doesn't make you common law married.
Okay.
So yeah, it has to be that present intent.
All right. So probably with it being abolished in Pennsylvania, probably one of the tougher things is to try to prove from the couple's point of view that they were in a common law marriage before that was expelled.
Right, and it's always one spouse trying to prove common law marriage. It comes up in two situations generally. One is the one that I just talked about, where a spouse has passed away, and the surviving alleged spouse is coming forward and saying to the court and asking a common law marriage be recognized so they can be eligible for benefits. And the other situation is a divorce, right? You've got a couple that was together. That couple that's together for 30 years. They acquire all manner of property, and some of it is titled maybe in joint names. Some of it is not titled in joint names. And then they split up and say, one spouse maintains, the house that was in his joint name and other types of bank accounts and property, and the other spouse is kind of out in the cold. And they say, well, we've been together for this long, and they attempt to prove that common law marriage so that then they can enact a divorce, institute a divorce action to get their fair share of the property. So those are the situations, and yeah, it's tough to prove. You've got to, if both spouses are living and able to testify, you've got to prove by clear and convincing evidence that you actually had a present intent to marry. You have to have, it's almost akin to have taken those vows. And if one spouse has passed away, then common law marriage can be proved through the fact that you lived together on a consistent basis as husband and wife and had a broad reputation in the community as husband and wife. So that's when the court starts looking at lots of other things, like did you own titled vehicles and property in joint names, and did you use the terms husband and wife on those titles? Did you file joint tax returns as married? Did you have reciprocal wills and powers of attorney and beneficiary designations? All these kinds of things. How did the other family members refer to you? Did they refer to you as aunt, did your common law husband's nieces and nephews refer to you as Aunt Kathy? Okay, then that's more evidence that you had that familial relationship. Did you exchange rings? So there are lots of factors that the court starts to look at there.
All right. We're talking with Marshall Chriswell as part of our martial law segment here on Indiana in the Morning, and the topic this time around, common law marriage in Pennsylvania. It was abolished, but there are still many people who would be considered common law married, who have common law marriage considered because of the fact that those marriages were grandfathered in. But it is a tough thing to prove, as we've been talking about with Marshall Chriswell. Now, Marsh, this would probably come into play if there is a case of separation or divorce, then, wouldn't it?
It does. In some of the toughest cases are separate when you have separation of unmarried couples, because it seems like almost always one spouse gets the boyfriend, the girlfriend gets the short end of the stick whenever they separate. Because, as I mentioned, assets may be titled to just one spouse, most notably the home that they lived in to one of the partners, and so that is one of the things that you always want to look at in those situations. Is there a chance to prove a common law marriage here? Because then you can get access to those assets through the equitable distribution process set forth in the divorce code, and you actually can, the common law spouse can get their equity out of it. Another point that I want to make is that, because there is this misconception, there are so many people out there that are together for a long time, and maybe you have that spouse that doesn't own all the property, and they're concerned about what happens in the event of death or separation, death of their spouse, or separation of their the partner from the partner. And so you really need to think about this from an estate plan context as well. And I know we're almost out of time, but that it's really a good reason that I always say unmarried couples that are in a serious committed relationship that have acquired things together over a period of time, really it's one of the most important situations that you would want to have an estate plan consultation, because there is so little protection for the person that you're leaving behind if they're not your spouse.
Right.
You die, they have high inheritance tax consequences, and they may just be entitled to nothing. As a third party, essentially an unrelated person. So it's really important to think about those issues.
And they can contact you with more questions about common law marriage or any legal issue by how?
Yeah, you can contact the Chriswell Law offices at 724-465-5826. Stop and see us in the R&P Cole Building on Church Street in Indiana, or go online to www.westernpalawyer.com.
Marsh, we're up against it, as you said, but thanks a lot for calling in.
Thanks, Josh. Have a good week.